Hi, class. Um, let's start the chapter. Okay. In chapter 3, in the book Understanding Canadian Business, Competing in a Global Market. In this chapter, what will happen, the learning objective is to describe the importance of a global market and the roles of competitive advantage and the absolute advantage in a global trade. We'll explain the importance of importing and exporting and define the key elements used in the global business. We will illustrate the strategies used in the reaching global market and explain the role of multinational corporation in a global market. We're also gonna evaluate the force that affect the trading in a global market, debate the advantage and disadvantage of trade, protectionisms, define tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and give an example of common markets. And then we discuss the changing landscape of the global market in the end. So the dynamic global market. As you know, Canada is a market of more than 37 million people lives here. There are over 7 billion potential customers in 194 independent countries and more. There's others that's not countries. The global trends have hit the US and the Canadian auto industries, as you're aware of it, forcing the closing of some plants, moving it like to Mexico, to other countries. And that's a result, the loss of jobs, of the restructuring of companies, of many companies. So for example, the auto industry needs steels, needs aluminums, needs plastics. So the whole industry has gone down due to the demand, restructuring. The progressive companies are continuously looking for opportunities in the global market at the same time as they are looking for threat. So they're always looking for, global market and where is the businesses and whether they're going to need to move there or whatever they want to do because of the global market. And also they're looking at the threats of other companies moves in their territories. If we look at the world population, we notice that the Asia considered to be most populated area. It's also the biggest probably, with the 60%. It comes in after that, Africa with almost 15%. Europe is the 11 almost. North America is 7.4. South America is 6.3, and Australia is not even 1%, 0.5%. And you notice the 1/6 of consumption, world consumption, is consumed in the North America, which is 7.4. So they're not even 10% of the total population, but they consume 1/6 of world production. Big market, in other words. Now, exporting means selling good and service to another country. So if you're exporting the goods to other countries, when you sell the goods to other countries, and also the service. Canada is generally an exporting country. There's more export than import. Importing is buying goods and service from another countries, and the free trade is the movement of goods and service among nations without a political or economics barriers. So why trade with other nations? Why do we trade with another nation? A good example, let's assume I'm a good in cutting trees and my neighbor is good in sewing t-shirts. I can cut 10 trees a day and he can sew 5 t-shirts, for example. But if I'm going to go and sew my t-shirts, it's going to take time from me and I will end up sewing 1 t-shirt and cutting only 5 trees instead of 10. And other hand, my neighbor cannot cut trees, so if he's producing only 5 t-shirts, so if he's producing 4 t-shirts, I mean, if he wants to cut say 5 trees, he has to produce only 3 t-shirts. So it makes sense for me to not to sew t-shirt, and I'll give him 1 tree, and in return he's gonna give me 1 t-shirt. And instead of me doing my t-shirt and cut 8 trees instead of not 10. So bottom line, I'm saving 1 more tree. So I will be able to cut 10, give him 1, remaining 9, and have a t-shirt. But if I'm going to do my t-shirt and cut trees, I'm going to have a 5 trees and 5 t-shirts. Other best example you can see is the trade between Saudi Arabia and, for example, Canada. Canada has a lots of trees, easily to export lumbers to Saudi Arabia because it's a desert, and in Saudi Arabia is much cheaper to export the oil. It costs around $1 to $3 for a barrel, so they can sell the oil to Canada, which is to export that oil from Canadian land is going to cost $50 to $60 sometimes. So it's better for Canada to sell trees, buy oil from Saudi Arabia, and it's better for Saudi Arabia to buy trees and sell oil. So no one country can produce all the products that is people want and need. Nation who cannot produce what they want and need will want to trade with the countries who can add, who can and have a surplus. Like as example of the oil, there is a surplus of oil in Saudi Arabia. They can export it. It's much cheaper here to Canada, as a vice versa with the lumbers. Some countries have an abundance of natural resources, but lack of technology, like especially in case of oil, British petroleums, good technology, no oil. Saudis, lots of oil, no technologies. So some countries have the abundance of natural resources, but lack of technology, know-how to retrieve them. Other countries have the technology, but the lack of natural resources. And it differentiates between one difference between one resource and another resource, or something like that, one country to another, as much comes to technology also. Now, what's the pros and cons for free trade? In a free trade, the pros, as we said, is the global market contain more than 7 billion potential customers for the goods and services. We see that the productivity improves when the country produce goods and services and they have a competitive edge and they can produce more. So France can do more wine, sell it to Germany. Germany can do more Mercedes, sell it to France, because the competitive edge of France making good wine and Germany making a good cars. The global competition and less costly import keep the price down. So you tend in USA buy more Canadian product because it's cheaper. So the inflation does not curtail economic growth, doesn't stop the economic growth. And the free trade inspire innovation for a new products and keep the firm competitive challenge. So if you want to sell to state, There is extra things that you can add into your production, makes it more varieties or more competitive, for example, than only selling it to Canada. There is the uninterrupted flow of capital gives the country across for foreigner investment, which helps keep the interest rate low. So once there is an export and import of free trade, you will see investors, a lot of investors coming in Canada. They bring with them their cash, so they lower the interest rate because there is abundance of funds available in Canada. What's the cons? What's the bad things about a free trade? Well, first of all, the domestic worker, particularly in manufacturing-based jobs, can lose their jobs due to increased import or production shift to low-wage global market. For example, the t-shirt, the fashions is mostly moved to Vietnam or Bangladesh. So the factory workers who's here, they lost their jobs, or they have to take a low wage global market jobs. The second thing is workers may be forced to accept pay cuts from the employers who threaten to move their job to the lower global market. So they say, you need to take a pay cut or it's too expensive to operate here. So I'm moving my operation to Bangladesh, for example. Moving operation overseas because of the intense competitive pressure often means the loss of service jobs also and white collars because they're there, so they need to have their services there for these products and also might be needing the management to move there. The demand or hire managers there. The domestic companies can lose their competitive advantage when the competitor build advanced production operation in a low wage countries, and this is very obvious. Now, the theory of comparative advantage. Comparative advantage theory, a country should sell to other countries those products that is produced most effectively and efficiently. A good example, let's assume I'm a country and my job category is my neighbor is a country and he's doing t-shirts. So what's the most effectively and efficiently for me is to cut the trees and I should sell it to my neighbor and buy from other countries product that cannot produce as effectively and efficiently. So I'm buying from my neighbor, which is another country, is the t-shirt. For example, Japan has the ability with the cars and electronic items. USA in the war, they can sell lots of war machines. Canada has the advantage in some forestry, agriculture, and mineral products also. The theory of absolute advantage. Here, what we talked about it is the theory of comparative advantage. Here's the absolute advantage. Absolute advantage exists when a country has a monopoly on producing a specific product or has a able to produce it more efficient than all other countries. And we have a very good examples. They might South Africa in diamonds, for example, production, and you got Saudi Arabia, which is considered to be the bank of oil also. These are two countries have absolute advantage in this field. An absolute advantage in natural resources may not last forever, like the diamond production in South Africa, the oil in Saudi Arabia, and the global competition has caused some absolute advantages also to decrease because now you can get the oil from Mexico, from USA, from Caribbean countries, then you bring it from all the way from Saudi Arabia. That's an example. Now, example of multinational companies, getting involved in the global trade. We have Bombardier, a plane producing, manufacturing in Quebec, who they have a multi-location, they can produce less than 100 passenger cars, Sony, as you know, and Magna International. In Canada, small businesses overall contribute between 25 to 41% to Canadian gross domestic or GDP. Employees, which is about 7 million. So it's not a small number. People of companies, about 90% of all export. So it's really the bread and butter of Canada, small businesses. And government agencies such as Foreign Affairs, International Trade Canada, Export Development Canada assist companies in getting more involved in the international businesses. You can visit their website and see how they can help you if you're involved into doing some kind of an international trade from Canada to outside. Importing and exporting goods and services. The Canada Border Service Agency ensures that goods and services entering Canada are compliant with our regulations, both federally and provincially. So let's assume there is a farmer here who sells milk, produce milk, and make a complaint to Canadian that the American, to the Canadian Border Service Agency, that the American is dumping their prices or, adding water in their milk, whatever. That job, their job is really to investigate and stop it if it's necessary and if they find out this. So the trade with other countries provide jobs for Canadians and support them. And about 1/3 of Canadian jobs that is belong to export. Now you need to look at this one, and there is a different categories, the merchandise, we have the industry good and materials like metals, metal ores, chemical and plastic, and other industries. You can probably look at the forestry products, which is called as a lumber and sawmill products, wood pulp, and other production and newsprint, and other. And then you have what you probably an automotive products like passenger autos and motor vehicles and so on. So look at these merchandise trade and the example of them. And the sources from Canada International Trade and Service. And then you have what you call the services, which is represent 70% of Canada's Canadian GDP. It is like a travel service, transport service, like air transporter, water transporter. You get the commercial service like construction, insurance, computer information. And then you have what you call a government service like a military, post office, and business support. These are different services also. Take a look at them also. So how we measure the global trade? The balanced trade is what you call a country's ratios of export to import. If your export is 1/4, 20%, 1/4 of your import, so the export is every $4 you are losing, you have $1 revenue. But then when you have it's called a trade surplus, which is a favorable balance of trade, occurs when the value of a country's export exceed of its import. So if I'm exporting $10 billion worth of goods and services and importing $7 billion worth of goods and services, that's a $3 billion trade surplus. Add to that trade surplus is the investment that's coming. So if there is a $1 billion investment, if foreigners are putting money inside Canada, that's considered to be an export. Keep in mind. So keep in mind. So it's a $4 billion now, the trade surplus. The trade deficit is unfavorable balance of trade occurs when the value of the country's import exceed the of export, and we saw these cases a lot in the third world countries, especially in the Greece, where They had to import more than they export. Hungary is now in the same situation, that where they are importing more than exporting. So what's occurring there, happening, is what you call a balance of payment, which is the difference between money coming into the country from the export. So you're exporting, you're getting your money, and the money leaving from the country, which is called import. So you're importing, you pay money, causing the money to. Plus the money flows from other factors such as tourism, foreign aid, military expenditure, and foreign investment. These are the sectors where you see the balances and you add them. So, if, for example, if your tourism people are leaving to see other countries a lot, that means you are exporting. But if the people are coming here to see Canada, that's called imports. Now, look at this one is the balance, Canada's goods and services trade by the region in 2014. It's a little bit old, a little bit changes happening here, but you look at it and start evaluating when it comes to the goods and services. We have some trade surplus with USA, but other countries probably maybe a shortage, especially in China is not clear. But in Mexico, for example, is the goods we're exporting $1.7 billion and we're importing $3.5 billion for them. Take a look at this and see, have a good idea about how the Canadian business and the international business is moving. Now, Canada is a priorities market. There is a preferences to trade in Canada with certain countries. And because of the emerging economics are experiencing the high growth, improved living standard, and more global prominence. Like the China in the old days, probably nobody were able to afford buying a mobile. Now everybody can afford buying a car, also not only a mobile. So that's the growth because due to the growth and their ability to export, making more money, and they're richer, so it's easy to sell them a Canadian product. There is a what you call the technological advances allow most of region in the world to be included in the global trade now through the internet and all these things, easy to communicate and do a trade worldwide. The federal government, on the other hand, has developed a global market action plan, which identifies the three important for the Canadian trade. These important regions, or whatever it's called, these include emerging market of 21 countries that they looked at it in the Asia Pacific and Latin America and Caribbean and North America, Middle East, Africa, and European. But in the most favorite is China and India are of a particular interest to the Canadian exporter because of the huge market and population and ability to purchase. Well, when a company wants to reach outside, whether they want to export or reaching outside in general, there is a different stages. We will talk about them in another chapter. But in here, you see that it could be starting from foreigner, from just licensing, and then keep or exporting or only franchising. Is depend on the strategy of the company and also the rules and regulation of other company and how be competitive there. So you can be doing a licensing, you can do exporting, you can do a franchising, like McDonald's everywhere, contract manufacturing, international joint venture and strategic alliance and foreign trade investment. We'll speak about them in the later chapters. Where from the least to the most, the amount of commitment, when it's a licensing, there's not much amount of commitment there. But when you foreign direct investment, there's a huge amount of commitment because you're putting your money, expertise, and everything. There is more controls and higher profit potential. There is some companies that they are working in the international, and you need to probably look at them. There was one in a few of them, probably three in the United States: Apple, Walmart, and ExxonMobil, who works internationally. And then you get the Chinese, three Chinese companies, and Japanese Toyotas, Honda Toyota up level, British Petroleums also. They are into BP, and Royal Dutch, which is belong to Netherlands. These are multinational companies located everywhere in the world. Now, forces that affecting the trade in a global market. Socio-cultural forces, culture and ethnocentricities. Probably, if you notice that the culture affecting which countries you want to export to. For example, if you're exporting from Canada, you do this United States. And the second thing, you're probably not looking at Mexico, you're looking at UK because kind of, you know, culture-wise is it close to it. Mentally also, the traders think about it this way. Now then you have the economics and finance forces, like the dollar exchange rate of US or the Canadian, how stable it is, how low it gets, how devaluated, and also the counter trading, which is they're putting tariffs or something like that. The other thing that you look at it is the legal forces. So the government probably putting lots of laws, not importing goods, and there was lots of examples that you can think about it. Like, for example, the Japanese are not able to export cars directly to USA, so they came up with their manufacturing here in Canada to export. And the Americans cannot export their Harley Davidson's motorcycles directly from USA to Japan, so they came and established a manufacturing in Vancouver. So that's to just counter trade, finding because of the legal forces, you need to do that. Alcohol, it's banned for example, in Saudi Arabia, so legal forces there to stop it. Then you have the physical and the environmental forces also that might not allow you to do that. Is, for example, the physical, the location of the country. It's just difficult to export apples from Canada all the way to South Africa because of the distance. These are the funny thing. Sometimes international company does it and translate things that does make not, the ethnocentric, the culture part of it's different. So they look at it differently. For example, the Electrolux, which is a Scandinavian vacuum manufacturing, tried to sell its product in North America. Their slogan says, "Nothing sucks like an Electrolux." For the North American means nothing bad as Electrolux. So these, you can look at them, they're funny in a way. Countries rated highest in corrupt business. Funny thing, you look at it, they're all in the third world countries, and most of them Arabian countries. I don't know why, or a Muslim country. Anyway, so the number one is Somalia. Iraq is number 10. And then the Canadian is 165, so number 10. And then the least one is Denmark, which is the most transparent country in the world, less these corruptions. I guess partially political instabilities, wars, war zones, all these can cost corruptions. Then what you have the trade protectionisms, and you're aware of it. Sometimes you think that the other country can, people can consume your product, but you cannot send it to them. That's due to the trade protectionism. A trade protectionism is the use of the government regulations to limit the import of goods and services, like the trade protectionism available in Iran is, not allowing so many foreigner cars to enter. Then you have what you call dumping, and that's what with American companies and American government complains about China, which is selling the product in a foreign country at a lower price than those charged in the producing countries. So that's we always hear dumping problems in NAFTA between USA and Canada also. Then you have the what you call tariff as a tax imposed on imports. So you're importing a car and you have to pay 200% on the car to import it. So it makes more sense to buy a local car, for example. That's another trade protection. And there is import quotas. You allow 1 year, for example, to import one Persian carpet or 3 kilos of saffron from Iran. That's what the laws between Iraq and Iran. So any Iraqi guy can only import one Persian carpet a year and buy only 3 kilos of saffron. And if you know the kilo of saffron, I think around $18,000. And then you have, and that's imposed by the Iraqi government to protect it, port quotas. Then you have the embargo, which is you heard the embargoes against Russia, embargo against Iran, North Korea. These are all countries, which is a complete ban on the import or export, or import and export of a certain product or the whole country, or the stopping of all trade within that particular country. We heard about GATT and WTO, or World Trade Organization. GATT is a general agreement on tariffs and trade, established in 1948. Agreement is an international forum for negotiation, mutual reduction in a trade restriction. They're trying to create some kind of a free trade within the world. Then we had what you call WTO, or World Trade Organization, which is the international organization. It's all under United Nations, by the way, that replaced the General Agreement, or the GATT one, on trade and tariff, and was assigned in the duties to mediate trade dispute among nations. So if you have a trade dispute between two countries, they can come in and solve or mediate it between them. Then what you heard about it is IMF, very famous international money fund, an international bank that makes a short-term loans to countries experience problem with their balance of trade. They're very much involved now with Mexico, the Tiger countries, they were involved with it, and Cyprus, and Greeks also. And there's lots of political instabilities also. And then you have the World Bank, which is the autonomous United Nations agency that borrows money from more prosperous countries and lend them to less developed countries, develop their infrastructures. China is doing their own separate thing. For the Silk Road, for example. There's lots of political debates about these organizations like IMF and World Trade Bank, and what's their intention of lending money, and who's they supposed to lend to money, whether they just lend money to corrupted politicians who would steal the money and leave the country with the debt, for example, or bad investors. Anyway, there are so many things. We will probably down the road, we'll talk about them if it's necessary. Now that we have something called culture, and the most important one is you heard about it a lot, is the oil cartel, which is organizations of commodity producing countries that are formed to stabilize or increase the price to optimize the overall profit in the long term. There is another culture now is happening for the gas. The OPEC is for oil, which is the Organization of Petroleum Export Countries, is the most widely known cartel right now. But there are other commodities such, there's a cartel for coppers, for rubbers, for tungstens, and even for chocolates, cocoa. Cartel operate to restrict the free flow of goods and therefore to control the prices according to their wish, whether they want to make more profit or they want to keep some other competition out by lowering their profit. We heard of common and we heard of the trading bloc, which is a regional group of countries that have a common external tariffs, no internal tariffs between them, and coordinating of law to facilitate exchange among members. That's an example is EU or European Union and NAFTA, which is North American Free Trade. NAFTA is agreement that created a free trade among Canada, United States, Mexico, and Chile. I wonder why they don't call Chile a lot. And then you have the European Union consists of a group of countries which is located primarily in Europe with a population of 508 million people and a GDP of almost $18.5 trillion. They don't have rules and restriction between their countries, but for one bloc, they do that. Currently, Canada involved in 11 free trade agreements. One of them is NAFTA, one of them is with the Pacific. We have one with, I believe, Israel, and a list goes on. So what's going to be the globalization in the future? It is estimated that China will take over the United States because, now there is lots of economics war between China and the States because China has grown so quickly and so fast. And it will take over the world's largest economy in the world by 2028. India also has a huge growth in the IT, pharmaceutical, and biotechnology. China and India predicted the world market as a leading global suppliers of manufacturing goods and services. So that's the reason you see Canada trying to, it is working very well with the Canadian and China, with the Indian and Chinese government. Russia and Brazil are expected to dominate the world market as a suppliers of raw materials. So Russia, Brazil, India, China are making one bloc. It's called the BRICS, and Iran is trying to add themselves into that bloc also. Now, the pros and cons of offshore outsourcing. Sometimes this is very famous, and especially in the IT field. I need the software. I can speak to somebody in India to develop that software, which is an offshore outsourcing instead of asking my own people or my own country to develop that software. The pros of it is a less strategic tasks can be outsourced globally, so the company can focus on where they can excel and growth. The outsources works allow the companies to create efficiencies in the effect to them hiring more workers. So if you're outsourcing less strategic and less important or more expensive things that you can save a cost, so it's good for you as a company. You can outsource work, allows the companies to become more efficient, so less more effective and more efficient, cheaper, and consumer benefit from eventual lower prices, which is generated by use of global resources and developing. So it's cheaper to produce a T-shirt in Vietnam or a runner for Nike in Vietnam, and eventually is when I get it, I'm supposed to get it cheaper as a price. The cons of offshore outsourcing is jobs could be lost permanently, and when the less job supply, the wage fall, you know that, and offshore may reduce the product quality because you're producing in other countries with less knowledge. You notice like some products probably less quality now because it's produced overseas, which can cause a permanent damage to a company's reputation. Communication with the company, with its suppliers, with the customers become a little more difficult because of multiculturalism, multi-background, ethnic backgrounds also made it more difficult. So for the chapter of this summary is Canada has a population, we said that's 37 million people. Absolute and competitive advantage refers to the efficiencies countries develop in producing goods and services. Import and export occurs when countries trade with each other. And we brought an example of states in Canada, me, and let's assume me, I'm a country, my neighbor is another country. We talked about trees and t-shirt. The strategy used to reach global market could be exporting, licensing, franchising, contract manufacturing, joint venture, strategic alliance, and foreign direct investment. And I promise you that we will explain each one of them. We'll go more details into each one of them in the future. But we saw in the slide how these types of strategic to reach the global market. And we talked about forces that affect the global market, include sociocultures, economics. We talked about the dollars or the value of the currency, the evaluation or devaluation, the financial situation, the legal, physical environment forces. The country use the protectionist devices. Can they use it like the trade protectionisms to limit the trade with other countries? These include, for example, we heard about the tariffs, import codes, and embargo, and there is something called dumping and all these things. The global market are changing to the internet, and the emergences of countries like India, China, Brazil, Russia as a potential trade partners, and this is why Canada is, is keen to have a trade partners as China and India. So this is the end of the chapter.